someone should be covering for him.
There is, my concern is that I prefer to get it from Jim, as he's the one who works closely with our Board of Health, and he is the head of
Yeah, he's the
Neshoba.
director, yeah.
And honestly, it's a data point within, so that to me is a minutia detail that changing doesn't take too long, and it's an hour conversation, not a 4-hour conversation.
Okay.
When it gets here.
Well, you think so, but look at that.
Hey, I was going to say 15 minutes, so I quadrupled it to an hour, so. And again, I think, if we look at the bylaw comments that Paula suggested, the public hearing, I think that we all got the sense that the board was in favor of the public hearing the last time we discussed it. I did change site definition, so it just says one or more contiguous lots. That is done. 10 to 1,000, she's recommending 500, which was certainly discussed the last time. I don't think there was ever a final vote or discussion on where we wanted to land with that. Same thing with earth fill. And then article was changed to bylaw. 5 to 3, I'm honestly in favor of that as well. I think it's in the life of an earth removal operation, that extra 2 years doesn't greatly change it, but that's certainly a discussion. And in the, I just want to read it again, the enforcement and violations, we can clarify that. Usually what it is the per offense does compound daily.
But it doesn't say that.
But that's per offense, and then we can add language in that
And
says
each day shall constitute a separate
therefore
offense.
shall constitute a separate
Yeah,
offense.
yeah.
And I will just mention that I have to apologize that just in the last month, there's just been one thing after another coming up in my private and personal life, so I really haven't had an opportunity to look at hardly anything, and certainly not get back to Adam with any comments. Again, I apologize for that.
No apology necessary. I just don't. I'm not being a scofflaw about updating the bylaw. I can't put a lot of effort into without some direction and guidance.
Yep.
I guess in regards to the times and the rules and regs, there was no specific times in that we have now, right?
No, it's per permit, and I don't
Right,
think
well,
that the
again,
permits that exist have any condition to time.
I mean, can we put verbiage in there or, because if they can prove that earlier hours aren't going to affect anybody, then I don't see why they shouldn't be allowed to have it.
And I think
Is
one of
there
the
a
things that we-
caveat in there where they have the ability that we should set standard hours and then maybe have the ability to modify them per permit?
I think the discussion at the last meeting was exploring a distance from residential property or district that would.
Yeah, but I mean,
those hours might not apply because really the issue would be someone's enjoyment or use of their private property on
Right.
a weekend when, an earth removal operation is happening within, even if it were 500 feet
And are these allowed, where are they allowed as per the use table, anywhere? Or-
Well, earth removal is allowed everywhere.
Right. So-
Because it's, while it's a primary use, it's not a primary use.
Right, no, I understand that, but I mean, some could be considered, I mean, they have 1-tons that run like regular cars. They have, I mean, our loader is quiet as quiet can be, it runs quieter than my car. So I just don't want to limit the abilities of people to run their businesses. I mean, obviously, I'm concerned about how it affects other people, but I think it needs to be taken on a case-by-case basis
And-
as far as hours of operation, like we do any business.
And blasting and rock hammering are under a different regulation, is that correct?
In what way? And not any planning board regulation.
Right, I mean, in general, like blasting and rock hammering, well, rock hammering.
Rock hammering
might
is not, I mean.
So that's my other question. So sometimes, I mean, we just dig into the side of the hill with a loader and load it into the processor. There's no blasting, there's
Right, it's
no, I
not
mean, it's a
that loud.
fairly simple
Right.
operation.
you-
There's no trucking.
But
It's just
there's
on
no
site.
earth removal. Powell doesn't have any earth removal on his site currently.
Right,
Or on their site.
right.
So what they're doing is moving product. Now, and I'm open to extending the hours, to eliminating the standardized hours. It was something I put in there just
Right.
as a, you know, if we're going to put regulations, let's put something standard.
Right.
And maybe you put, maybe you allow weekends, maybe you don't allow Sundays and holidays, maybe, maybe the hours are this, and outside of those hours, this is what needs to be done, or you're allowed so much time out. I'm open to working with it. And I guess my question is, and this is something that Paul alludes to in her comments, is hearing from the permit holders. What do you do removal on the weekends, or is it just moving stuff around and processing? Like, I know Keating runs from probably April to November. That plant is going 7 days a week, maybe not 24 hours, and that's not part of the earth removal permit. That's a manufacturing operation that's working as an approved use in an industrial zone. Are they in the quarry on Saturday, knocking rocks out with a blast and moving them? I don't know. I would suspect not, because I expect that that's expensive to have those guys show up on a weekend and move rocks.
And then there was the one other one, I can't remember where it was, but it was in relation to it just sounded like Matt brought up the point, I can't find it, about the intended future use of the property. I can't remember where it was.
That's the closure plan.
Okay, and that, I mean, honestly, as long as they're in compliance with the law and don't disturb the environment, it really is none of our concern what they do with their property after they're done. I mean, as long,
No, it isn't.
and I just don't want to give that indication that
mean,
we have a concern. As long as you do what's legal and under our law after the fact, that's up to you. I mean,
And
it's-
currently, the bylaw does allow the board of select, or the select board, to require a closure plan that says what will be done with the property at the end.
Well, I'm
Now,
just-
most people, like, will say, oh, I'm gonna take this hill down and I'm gonna plant grass.
Right.
Closure plan done, our finished grade is, 536, and we're gonna loam and seed, and we're gonna move on.
right.
And someone like Keating with their pit, I don't think they have any idea what their ultimate goal is at the end. They probably have
Just a
100
giant
years.
hole in the ground.
They have 100 years worth of material.
Right,
what you
right,
do with
right.
something like that in 100
Yeah,
years is,
Again, I'd like to see them used in a way that's environmentally recreation
Well,
area.
exactly,
If you're
but-
not going to be able to build houses, a great place for a dirt bike track or something, because it was already noisy.
Yeah.
You only need one place with native soil to park for a bathroom, and just do a little shack in a bathroom, So, but I'm just trying to think of the future uses of these, because if they're not going to be able to use,
and
the
it's really
houses-
just an
Just sit
attempt to
dormant.
get them to look at, not just we're going to remove this earth and we'll figure that out later, but
Right.
here's what our initial plan is, and none of this is written in stone. I mean, you know, they have to come back at some point to renew or to close out, and I think the water district is probably a good example. They currently have an earth removal permit because they were taking because they're a public utility, the way that their bidding goes was taking longer than they wanted to get the building permit. But they had a lot of earth they needed and wanted to remove. So rather than waiting to hold the building permit to fit the exemption, they got an earth removal permit to start trucking stuff out. So their closure plan is, we're gonna build our offices, and we're done. And that's a reasonable closure plan.
And they've already got their as-built almost and everything, so they're ready to go.
Well, they have their design,
Right,
and then
right, right.
once they do the as-built for us, they can bring it to the selectmen and say, here we go.
Right.
We're done.
But once these regulations go into effect, they'll have to do a closure plan prior to their as-built, correct? If they don't
Correct, but the
fill,
clo-
if
but
they
the-
don't fill, if they're not complete before we adopt these.
Correct, but the closure plan could be to bring to this grade and loam and seed.
Okay,
Finished grade will be this, finished with loam and seed. That's a closure plan. That's not an open dirt pit that's leaking silt and water throughout the area where that happened.
So do we currently have a closure plan requirement?
It says there's a may in the clause.
Okay.
So,
Does it have a maximum slope listed?
no.
no.
Okay. So then, because I've just been working with the Hubbardston's earth removal permit. They've updated I believe they updated their bylaw last year, and their rules and regulations are pretty lengthy. And they have, I believe, 6 earth removal permits active in the town.
Okay.
So they've been experienced with it, and I was impressed by their level of detail. So I will definitely forward that on with hopefully comments soon.
Okay. And, you know, I did install, or I did include slope standards in the restoration. So 1 to 2, which is, you know, it's not super steep, but it's not flat and gentle.
Yep.
And I guess Paula may have the answer to this question. So when you say you can only perk in native soil, does that sewering doesn't?
Sewer eliminates that.
Sewer eliminates that need.
Right,
Yeah.
right. So you would be able to, so if it was sewered, they would be able to develop it,
Right,
housing, okay.
right.
Sewer essentially eliminates any Title V needs.
Right,
Right. It doesn't eliminate potential contamination from the groundwater by
No.
by the earth removal operation.
Correct, but it
But it
elimin-
does eliminate the Title V
Yes.
requirements, yeah.
Anything more on earth removal?
Well, I think we need to talk about some of about whether we're doing 500 or 1,000 cubic yards, whether we're doing 5 years or 3 years, I think Adam's looking for some direction, right?
Yeah, I think, and that, only the board can decide that.
Right.
Well, I really do like the idea of having a public hearing, and I would think that we'd want that input before we made a decision on really any of that.
But I think that when you have the public hearing, you want to have a bylaw that the board says, here's our bylaw.
This is what we
Tell us
think."
everything that you think is terrible about it or great about it, and we'll decide whether or not we want to change it. So
Yeah.
if you say, we want 500, and PJ Keating comes in and is like, well, really, we think 2,000 would be perfect. And you get a bunch of people who come in and say, it should be 250. You can look at it and say, oh, well, you know, we think you're both wrong, we're going to stay at 500, and no one's given us a compelling reason to change it.
All right. Well,
You can mark things that you're like, this is something we hope people will comment on, but the board should have a position that they start from Whether they're willing to move or not is up to you based on the arguments and how strongly you believe in that initial position.
All right, so is there anybody that thinks it should be less than 500 cubic yards?
No,
Less than 500? No.
no.
Tanner?
No, no, I
Anybody that thinks it should be greater than 1,000 cubic yards?
No.
I'm just trying to look at it in terms of, there's a lot of requirements here, and I'm trying to come up with a threshold that makes sense for everybody.
So you're looking for the catch-22 in the reg. So we can address that in different ways. So I mean, in general, as far
Well,
as...
I'm no engineer. You would know better than me, but just looking at the amount of testing and engineering, especially if you have a site that's, say, 5 or 10 acres, and you want to do this, you need to locate every property line, a complete topographical survey, before and after, all the cut-fill calculations. I can't imagine somebody going through that engineering and not spending $10,000.
Yeah.
And so if the threshold is 500 yards, do the math. You've got to be moving some pretty expensive dirt to get that $10,000 back.
And I'll say, the regs are my recommendation. The board can say they're too strict. We don't want all this testing. We want to dial it back here or dial it back there. And that's
But we
another
can
way to-
waive any requirement, correct? There's a waiver provision in the.
You can.
Of the rules and regs, not the
Correct, not the bylaw.
not the bylaw.
Oh, okay, okay.
Only the rules and regs,
And
because
so-
that's like site
Thank
plan
you,
approval.
thank
We
you.
can only waive the rules and regs,
Thank you.
not the bylaw.
Yeah, so if you have a site, for example, that you have a sand or a gravel or some material you want to remove or fill, and you're not going very deep, the amount of engineering you're going to put into that is quite a bit, versus you have an esker of gravel that's 35 feet tall, it's stacked deep, now you can justify the engineering, you know what I mean? So that's the thing that I'm wrestling with to try to figure out a happy medium. Our current bylaw says 10 yards now.
10.
A homeowner can't even put a in-ground swimming pool in their yard without it.
They can because you need a building permit.
But
no, I take
a
your
koi
point.
pond.
Yeah,
You can't put a
correct.
koi pond in your backyard without an earth removal permit?
So
Well,
how
that's
many,
really
how, many,
tiny.
how many earth removal permits have been applied for in the last 5 years then?
None.
So
It
then,
just flies under the radar because the requirement isn't well known and it's not well enforced, especially if you don't have a building inspector.
Well, and
so-
enforcing that isn't it's not something the building inspector is looking for, nor is it easily defined.
Yeah.
And so I think you
I'm
can
just trying to-
you can focus on that enforcement, or you can say, well, it doesn't
Let's-
make sense to have this
Yeah.
small.
And that's where I'm
threshold.
just trying to come up with something that's reasonable, that is not necessarily easy to comply with, but is reasonable, that somebody could, go through this process and come up with a closure plan and do everything right, without being faced with harsh economies, so to speak.
well, perhaps we could go in a similar direction as we went with the solar bylaw and have a large scale and a small scale, or like
That's-
a commercial
well-
versus a residential.
Because that's kind of what I was going to ask Paul is, where's an instance where 500 yards would, I'm just trying to, where it would be detrimental. I know you say since septic systems and construction in new buildings are, in additions are exempted. Just what's your thought process on?
My concern is the impact to a residential area. I mean, if my neighbor started doing an earth removal operation or a filling operation, and I was being impacted by truck after truck after truck in the residential area, that's my concern.
So-
And to go from 10 to 1,000, to me, seems an enormous jump. But at the same time, if it were happening over in a commercial or industrial zone, I wouldn't care.
And I guess, so yeah, I mean, to me, 1,000 yards isn't a lot because I deal with dirt every day. But again, 500 yards isn't truck after truck after truck. But again, if
I
there was a
thought-
duration, you know what I mean? If it said, 500 yards over the course of a month or whatever, you know, that, and then they'd be done.
Oh, that
I would
might
be
make-
fine
that
with it.
might make
You know what I
sense.
mean? But if they were doing it over the course of, over the course of a whole permit, you know, do we have a way to,
Well,
I know the permits are gonna be good for either 3 or 5 years, and that's kind of where we paint ourselves into a corner. But if we said, you know, if they're building a certain project or doing a certain activity that's gonna remove 500 yards, but they're only gonna do it for a month, that's not a, I mean, it impacts them, but over the duration of the ownership of their house, it's a month.
But I
out of their
thought, and
lives is
Tanner,
a
I can't
a
remember,
huge-
yeah, I can't remember what you said, how many trucks 1,000 cubic yards was. 50, how many was it?
So,
56 or something?
25 tons per triaxle, so that's,
20 yards per truck.
yeah. Oh, yards, we're
So-
talking yards, so
Yards,
20
yeah.
yards per truck, so that's 200 trucks,
Yeah. That's my concern.
50 trucks.
50 trucks.
50 trucks, 50
I'm
trucks.
gonna
So,
use a
so,
calculator,
and
it's
I mean,
too
if
late
you're
for
doing a site, you can
Math in
haul
my
50
head.
trucks out of there in a week, you know?
I was gonna say, how many trucks do you pull in a day? 10 a day?
Oh, where we are? Oh,
But no, I
Probably
mean,
almost 100.
but you're also
It's all over the place. It's
you've
not
got
like a-
you've got lots of people coming in,
Right.
so it's not you're not one person removing.
That's what I mean. All our activity isn't all just on one site. We're moving stuff all
Correct.
over the place.
So-
We're hauling stuff out.
I gotta ask a question. I didn't realize you worked in earth removal. Does this regulation impact you?
I'm in sales.
It doesn't.
It
So
doesn't?
no.
Okay.
Material stockpiled, this doesn't apply.
Right.
Because it's not native material. You bring in a load of bark mulch and you pile it up,
We
it's
just-
not
Okay,
native.
I just
Retail
don't want to
sales
be in a
where I am.
situation where we get questioned because of a
No, I mean, for
conflict.
full
no.
disclosure, I mean.
Okay.
And
Pals, it's
he's
a
not the
surprise.
decision maker, and
Okay.
this board isn't the decision maker.
Okay.
So it avoids that. Now, if his employer came in and applied for an earth removal permit,
I would
he
step
would
away
need to
from the table.
recuse himself.
Okay.
But as far as the regulations go, town meeting is the ultimate
Authority.
authority.
Okay.
So
Okay.
whatever influence
Just,
he
just
yeah,
asking
may
the
or may not
question because I
have.
was getting a little
Right.
concerned.
No, not at all. I mean, I appreciate.
Well, and
your
I,
concerns.
to Paula's point about, you know, if you're in a residential neighborhood and say you're in a more densely populated area, Hickory Hills, Whalum, Lake Shirley, and somebody's bringing in 1,000 yards on a half-acre lot, well, that's pretty significant. But you talk about the outlying district and,
It's
you know,
fine.
you have tracts of 65 acres, 100 acres.
Well,
I
look
mean,
at-
you can move 1,000 yards just by,
Look at
you know,
Pierce's Tree Farm, they hauled dirt for almost 2 years there, and I didn't
And there was
have-
minimal impact.
What,
so-
Exactly, it wasn't a huge deal.
What would 500 yards of fill do to a 3/4 acre lot?
it's, I think I did the math, it's about 6 inches. So if you
On,
have,
on 3/4 of an acre?
yeah, so if you have 30,000 square feet and you go 6 inches deep, it's 555 yards.
Okay.
And then you, there's
That's-
nothing in
That's your
here.
loam. If
Yeah.
you wanted the loam.
And I guess that's where I'm going is what's reasonable for a homeowner to potentially do. If someone buys a house in Hickory Hills, and most of those are between 1/2 and 3/4 of an acre or larger, and
No,
no, are they?
no, they're smaller.
Yeah.
Some
Oh,
of them
the-
are only
of an acre.
10,000 square feet, so tiny,
Okay,
tiny.
so you're talking about then 18 inches if you bring in 500
Yeah,
cubic
yeah,
yards. on
some
one
of those lots are just the house.
But most of those lots, you're not going to be able to build up 18 inches.
Well, so in certain areas of town, like around Hickory Hills, Lake Shirley, you're protected by the wetlands buffer.
Well, I was gonna say, and then you run
can't
into
stick
the
a shovel in
wetlands
the ground without
associations.
going
But
through
but
the.
No,
not
not
all
for
of
filling.
those run up
Not for-
against the
not for
lake.
fill.
There's a lot in that area that are far enough away, but
Right, they're not on the lake.
and
Yeah.
are in the current process of being turned over from long-term owners to who are passing away or downsizing or moving on. But if someone were to say try and redo their lawn, they're going to put down 6 inches of loam, so they're going to be filling. So on a 1 acre lot, they're going to trigger earth removal permit or an earth fill permit at 500 cubic yards.
Why don't we differentiate between the lot size? Why can't we have different requirements for different size lots? I mean, if somebody wants to bring 1,000 cubic yards into outlying on a 20-acre parcel, or take in, that doesn't bother me. But it's the highly congested areas where it could significantly impact the neighbors that it does bother me.
Well, and I don't,
And it's the traffic that's the concern.
To
not,
me, it's the
not
traffic.
not the material being put in.
Well, it depends. I mean, our regulations say that you can't negatively impact and that the stormwater ratio has to be
Correct.
the same. So how you could do that, I have no idea.
But somebody putting in, we've gotten 6 inches as a reasonable amount of loam. So someone putting in 6 inches on a 2-acre lot is clearly going to trigger a fill permit, whether it's 500 or 1,000.
Right.
And at that point, the board would have the ability potentially to limit or condition the way and the volume with
And-
which they're bringing
and the
those.
times
Yeah,
and
well,
things
yeah,
like that
and the
nature,
time
that's
that
what I
they're
mean.
bringing them in. So, what I think is a lower threshold offers the ability for the board, offers the ability for the board to have more impact on more events. I don't know what the right
I
way
mean,
to-
but those are in the bylaw, so, I mean,
So
once
the
we,
bylaws,
once
we
we,
can't waive them.
once we say them, we
Correct.
can't waive them, and that's
That's my
That's
problem.
my concern.
Well, and
I'm-
that's
Well,
Because I know the first one we're gonna get is gonna be like, oh,
But
man.
right now, the
too
bylaw's
bad,
10.
Sorry, yeah, right, exactly.
right now, the bylaw
but
is 10.
there's no provisions for fill. You can
it's just
fill
removing.
all day long,
So
however much you want.
why don't we look at that? Why don't we say people bringing in loan? Why don't we have different thresholds for bringing in versus taking out?
That's fine.
Yep.
And,
Well,
and
and
we
just to-
and they're in separate sections, so you can have.
Maybe we do that.
Well, and just to give a different perspective on this, if we said 500 yards of material, and, I talked about doing $10,000 worth of engineering, which by the time you do 4 test holes and topographical surveys and locate all the property lines, I think you could probably spend 10 grand in engineering. That's $20 a yard you're paying. So if you're gonna go buy screened loam from Powell or Proctor or whoever, and you're gonna pay $25 a yard, you could have basically bought all your material for what you're gonna spend in engineering.
So is 1,000 reasonable for fill, or should it be
We've
higher?
effectively doubled the cost of a project for a homeowner.
So
But
should
for
it, should
a homeowner,
1,000?
you have the option to waive filing requirements within your regulations.
But we can't change the 1,000 to 500.
No.
So that's what we're talking about.
Oh, I'm sorry. But you mentioned engineering and homeowner and buying loam. So I guess
Once it
what,
triggers the permit, they have to do that.
Then they'd have
But
to,
they-
well, we
they
can
have
waive
to
it.
file
We have
for
to
a
file,
permit,
but we
right.
can
So,
waive it.
I would say a homeowner who's purchasing loam to redo their lawn would be analogous to someone occupying an existing building under site plan approval and not changing anything, which this board has.
Still have to ask for a waiver.
You do, but a homeowner can come in here and say, this is what we're doing, we're asking that you waive. I mean, we've had plenty of small business owners who don't hire an engineer, who don't have experience coming in front of the board, and who have done it themselves through writing a letter and attending a single meeting.
waiver?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I know, and we've waived a lot of them, and I think a lot of those times we could have just went through the permitting process and come to a decision at the end of the night instead of just waiving it. And
Well,
then everything's,
but-
all the i's are dotted and the t's are crossed.
The point being
Because
the-
once we waive it, we have no oversight.
But the point being, the applicant saves the cost of all the
Right,
engineering.
I understand that.
And you do go through the permitting process in a sense. You review the site, and there have been some that you've told people they have to do things.
Right.
And they've agreed, and it's been memorialized in the waiver letter, and they've done those items.
And we had the skate park guy come in with hand-drawn sketches, and that went well.
Would we do 1,000 cubic yards for fill and 500 for removal? Is that reasonable?
Does that include stumps too?
No, it's fill removal.
Just fill?
Yeah,
I think
It's
stumps
earth
would,
removal.
yeah, I think stumps would, well,
Stumps are their own issue.
They're not earth removal.
Right.
Yeah.
It's not in the definitions. Of,
Can't pile them down on Whalum anymore.
Right.
Just a question, is 1,000, I mean, I don't care if people bring in fill for their lawns, I really don't. But it's when people are doing an earth removal operation that I'm concerned. And to go from 10 cubic yards to 1,000 seems really a huge jump for me. So I'm trying to find a happy medium.
Right. I mean, but again, starting at 10 was just a preposterous number. That's
I
that's
agree,
two
I
two
agree.
1-tons. I mean,
Yeah.
I agree, but I also think to remove 56 truckloads of fill from an adjacent property has a huge impact on a neighbor. I mean,
Potentially.
Just
potentially. I mean,
again,
where I
just-
live, if my neighbor removed 56 dump trucks of earth, it would significantly impact my day-to-day life. Because my neighbor is right here and my other neighbor's right here. So, I mean, the houses are extremely close together. There's no lot size requirement.
But again, if they were building a house, it would be the same disturbance. It's just a different.
Yeah, but building a house is a lot different than doing an earth removal operation.
I'm just saying the disturbance of the number of trucks. If you built the house, you'd probably have the same number of trucks as you would doing that amount in earth removal. So
there are
just because
requirements-
it's a house, the disturbance is less than it is.
But,
And again, it comes down to duration, you know?
But, okay, so my next door neighbor decides he's going to, and this isn't relevant because my next door neighbor would never do this, but your neighbor decides he's gonna remove 1,000 cubic yards of fill from his property. He doesn't have a house on it, and there are many lots that are vacant. They remove that 1,000 cubic yards of fill. You're living with it for, I don't know, a few weeks while they're doing whatever they're doing. They're grading, they're doing all this stuff. And then they just leave it because there's no requirements for a permit. There's no requirements for a plan. You could just be looking at an empty hole next to you forever because there's no requirements for them to fix it. If they don't have to get a permit, they don't have to fix it. You can just be looking at a huge sand pit at what used to be a wooded lot. That bothers me.
Well, like you
Well-
said, how likely is your neighbor to do that?
Well, you don't know, there is a lot that I can think of specifically where I could see them doing that. Down the street from me, absolutely.
well, and not to make light of the example, but this isn't the only protection. Like, there's still the wetlands bylaws and Board of Health and all
If-
of that.
if
And
you're-
so
if you're on a
depending on the
wetland.
situation, you know,
But
there's-
if you're adjacent to a wetland, but say this happens in Whalum and they're not on the lake, they're outside of a wetland, there is no protection. So at what point, so that's why I'm saying, do we want to, I understand your argument about bringing in loam for a lawn, and I can understand that, because that happens all the time, and people go against, we don't have any requirements for fill right now. So if we're all of a sudden going to adopt requirements for fill, maybe we go easier on those. But on removal, when you're actually excavating earth adjacent to other properties, I think we've got to be careful to go from 10 to 1,000 right away.
See, I'm more concerned on the flip side. I'm more concerned about what's coming in.
What if your neighbor wanted to
With-
bring in a mountain of loam next to you instead of the.
Or
removing it?
material that is of unknown origin.
See, now I'm
hasn't been
confused, because
tested.
you were using the analogy about
Well,
6 inches of loam, so I'm trying to come
I'm
up with
just-
a reasonable threshold.
I know, and I'm
So
trying
4
to
inches
flush
of-
out all the
4 inches
details.
of loam is typical for covering a lawn.
Okay.
4 inches, and 4 inches at 1 acre at 4 inches is 488 cubic yards.
Yeah.
So to exempt single-family homes from anything more than 500 cubic yards of fill would be reasonable to cover the loam.
Anything less than.
Less than.
Yeah.
Less than.
Less than.
And you lose some material to
So-
compaction.
But,
Again,
but
there's no
I think
reason-
I don't think you want to exempt them from anything. Well, you would just want to,
We've already got some exemptions, don't we?
yeah, you just want to put the threshold. You don't want to exempt
Well, single-family homes.
single-family homes from
Given.
fill under something.
Right.
because they could use the fill for anything.
So to fill in a 30 by 40 cellar hole that's 8 feet deep is 355 yards, cubic yards.
So is so that's what we're talking about. Is 500 reasonable? But if you have a 2-acre lot, then 1,000 would be reasonable.
You could
So-
put it based on per acre.
Right, so change it by lot
500
size.
per acre?
So change it by lot size, and then I'd be fine.
Again.
Well, if you did
it's-
500 per acre, 1,000 for two, or, you know, 2 acres.
And, I mean, that kind of follows along the lines of units per acre for density. So hypothetically speaking, you have a 100-acre lot, and you've got, so if you say 1,000 per acre, you could pull out 100,000 yards.
But we could
Well, you go
not
to
to
one,
exceed, you know.
if you go to one side of the lot and you pull it all out on one side, is that still appropriate? Right?
So the way the filling reads is 1,000 cubic yards, provided that it involves either the disturbance of 2 or more acres of land. So if you have a 2-acre lot and you're building you're doing lawn, you're not going to disturb more than 2 acres because house, driveway, etc. So you wouldn't need a permit for that. And then filling.
Assuming the house and driveway are already there.
Correct.
Okay.
Because they're not gonna loam the yard to grass it until at least the foundation is in. but
Where are you
probably till
reading
there.
from?
The bylaw, second page, or third page rather. I should
have the
paginate
rules and
these.
regs, I don't see the bylaw.
You need
You
pages
got
and
2
dates.
acres, it's the bylaw.
I have dates.
Okay.
140-3B. 2.
Three, B, 2.
So it's either disturbing 2 acres of land or filling in excess of 18 inches in depth above existing grade. And it requires a 10-foot buffer from the property line and a 1-to-1 slope to the 10-foot buffer.
1-to-1 is 45 degrees. That's usually like an armored wall. You typically we specify anything greater than 3-to-1 slope. 3 horizontal to 1 vertical.
Yeah, it should be
Gets
3 to
gets
1.
reinforced soil, gets like,
Okay, so would you like me to change that slope or just take that out?
well, I think we want to circle it to address it. I just want to repeat that I'm reluctant to have much input right now because I have not reviewed it.
So do you want to table it?
I mean, I've reviewed a good number of other local removal permit requirements in the area.
You said you just saw one that was,
I've just been working with Hubbardston.
do you want to just table this for another,
Well-
meeting?
I mean, if you guys have reviewed it and you've got valuable input, then I'm certainly willing to talk about it.
But there's no reason not to table it. If you want
You
to
can table it, I'm
circulate.
fine.
Yeah, I mean,
I
we
guess
need
then
the all.
my one question is, do we have a feeling 5 or 3? Or do you want to just not, just wait on
5 or
that?
3, oh,
5 years
years.
or 3 years
Renewal.
for the
I
initial
think
and then a
5
3-year
years.
renewal?
Yeah, I think 5, I mean, I can agree to 1, 2, 6. I went through them
I think
already.
5's reasonable.
It makes it more convenient for the applicants, right?
It
Yeah.
does.
And it gives us, it bogs us down less.
Right,
2 and 5 are done.
right.
If you're all in favor, 6 is easy to change.
And you're going to fix the language on 7.
Yes,
That each
it is.
offense-
It is in there in one of them, and I'll just make sure. I'll just verify that it
Okay.
gets
And we're
in
not
there
going
for
to
the
go
rest
over
of
the
them.
rules and regs. We'll just table that until we.
Yeah, and
Let's just table
you know,
it.
I agree that having the rules and regs ready for town meeting is helpful. I don't think they need.
No, because we can do that on our own.
Yeah, the bylaw is really where you want to
Mm-hmm.
dial in.
So table it to our next meeting?
Sure.
Question mark? Question mark?
We got Stone Farm hearing here, which I haven't heard anything about.
That's the bond claim.
Oh, Stone Farm,
Yeah, yeah, the estates.
I mean, we can do it then, but between the hearing and the solar discussion, I don't
So
know.
move it to the next one,
I-
whenever you want to put it.
I'll put it on there.
Yeah.
I just want us to recognize that having those two hearings on the same night may or may not be, I mean, we've talked about trying to jam multiple things in there.
Well, it's not really a hearing, it's a discussion, right?
Solar? Correct, but we, at the last meeting, Greg brought up, I think, a valid point that trying to talk about multiple bylaws on the same night gets burdensome and bogged down and
It does. I think we should
exhausting.
concentrate every other one on.
So if you want, we can put it on the 9th and really hustle to have it ready for the 23rd when the selectmen are here. Because I mean, it sounds, honestly, Paulie, your biggest concerns seem to be
The groundwater.
focused around the regulations and the groundwater. And
And you're
that,
not
that's
gonna-
conferring with Jim, and again, that's, it's important, but it's not critical for town meeting yet. It's important to have them, but it's more important to have the bylaw finalized so that we can get it on the
But the
warrant.
bylaw is, it's in the bylaw, correct?
No, it's in the regulations. All the groundwater stuff is in the regs.
Okay, okay,
So
yep,
getting those dialed in for town meeting, important, but time critical is getting the bylaw to the
Yep,
point where you
agreed,
can have a public
agreed.
hearing.
agreed.
A question for Adam. In your years here, have you ever had an issue with earth removal causing a problem for neighbors? Like, have we ever?
I mean, that's kind of,
I'm just looking
I'm
for some
trying to-
feedback to say, okay, well, we had this
I can't.
situation that
I
was this
had
many yards.
someone come in who had an issue with their neighbor moving earth and potentially filling. And the issue was less about the project they were doing than it was about when and how long it was taking them to do it. And it wasn't even about trucks coming and going, it was about the actual noise of the activity
Yeah.
being conducted, the time of day and the days of the week.
I was just looking for
But no,
some
I haven't had
feedback
anybody.
that would say, okay, well, in this situation,
And-
10,000 yards was moved or 1,000
Yeah, no,
yards or
and
whatever.
going back to the last couple of years when Gary Rhodes really, at the request of the selectmen, dialed in all the earth removal permits. I mean, we're talking Mass Ave, Lemonster Shirley Road, rural Goodrich Street.
New Townsend, New West Townsend.
No, there was nothing on New West Townsend.
Oh, that was the stormwater, I'm sorry.
And there was an earth removal permit out on a fire road that had been renewed every year, but had never had any earth removed. So we're not getting a dearth of them. And I don't know that this is going to change that or just dial it in for the ones that we do get. I think really earth fill is where we're going to have the potential for impact. And even that, I don't know that we have a ton of people bringing in a ton of earth, figuratively or literally.
Cool. So, which meeting we were putting that to?
If we were going on the schedule, it would be the 9th of September.
Okay, so we put Unitil in for 23.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Any further discussions on earth removal?
Nope.
All right, off to master planning.
Believe this was put on here as part of the discussion about the committee aspect of it and was in conjunction with number 6,
Okay.
if I'm remembering our last meeting correctly.
Then should we move to number 6? Because we've got something to
I
reference?
thought we were going to wait to find out if we got the grant before we move
Correct.
forward with master plan.
Correct.
Isn't that-
And
Did, we were just gonna discuss forming a committee.
correct, since you were going to talk about earth removal committee, you said that might,
Earth from Economic
Economic
Development?
Development Committee, I'm sorry. One of those E's.
This is why we can't talk about multiple things on one night.
Perfect.
Just prove my point right there.
And so the board felt that potentially discussing master plan committee in the context of economic development committee was a reasonable discussion to have, regardless of whether we got the grant or not.
Yes.
So I did put, I thought I had emailed this to you, and when I went to print it out today, I realized I hadn't. So you have in front of you the charge of the Economic Development Committee as laid out by the Select Board. Was it 2 years ago now, almost? 18 months ago? And you'll notice it focuses on ecotourism and agricultural business development. What I would look at myself is the second charge: to provide advice to the Board of Selectmen on economic development, to meet, work with current Lunenburg businesses and prospective businesses, to coordinate its activities with, I would say, town boards and committees, and to work cooperatively with businesses and state agencies to retain and promote current business in Lunenburg, is a fairly comprehensive charge.
Yeah, I came up with something similar. I did add, I changed the wording of that first line. I think what I had was the Lunenburg Economic Development Committee is committed to promote economic development in the town's commercial and industrial zoning districts, promote ecotourism and agricultural business development, and promote ecotourism and agricultural business development within Lunenburg. And then I had the same thing you did with taking out the activities of the Conservation Commission, and I put appropriate town boards and town boards and committees. So we have the same thing, except I did leave the ecotourism and agricultural in, but I put it in addition to promoting economic development in the town's commercial and industrial zoning districts. Because I think it has to be multifaceted.
Well, and the reason I left the ecotourism and agricultural business out is that way.
Everything's open. You just had committed to promote business development.
Correct. Yeah, and economic and to provide the Board of Selectmen on economic development policy recommendations.
Yeah, and I would put it as,
Or,
it would
do-
be the planning board if it's us, right?
Well, it would be, I would say, to provide advice to all town entities.
Okay.
Because the
Well,
town
even
manager, the
yeah, I
planning
mean,
board, the
even
Board of
s-
Selectmen.
Even sewer's got a hand in economic
Everybody
development,
has,
you know?
Okay.
there's.
Okay. I'm fine with that.
So,
Can you read the whole paragraph?
So the way mine read was the Lunenburg Economic Development Committee is committed to promote business development within Lunenburg, to provide advice to town entities on economic development policy, to meet and work with current Lunenburg businesses and prospective businesses, to coordinate its activities with the activities of appropriate boards and committees, appropriate town boards and committees, and to work cooperatively with businesses and state agencies to retain and promote current businesses in Lunenburg.
It's very similar to what I had.
And you know, I've worked with these committees before. It often starts with just taking the temperature of the business community, what their needs are, why they're there, and then growing a relationship with them and using them as a voice to bring more people in to talk to the group and to dial it in. And it's a it's a long-term growth strategy. The Economic Development Committee can have great impacts immediately, but oftentimes it takes some time for them to get their feet under them and really start putting stuff forward, but it gives the business community someone to come and talk to. And the goals is something that can be the goals is something that the board can talk about some. The membership, you'll notice that business owners are included in there. I think that's important. I also think everybody on the committee is required to be a resident, which is great. It's nice to have our residents represented. It may be beneficial to either include some ex officio or other non-voting member or members that are business owners that don't have to be residents or shouldn't be residents, or to make a goal for the committee to create a business roundtable of some sort where on a quarterly basis, a group of business owners may come together that don't have to be Lunenburg residents and provide input and experiences and concerns in a way that can be brought back to the responsible parties or the parties who would deal with it, that isn't it doesn't fall off the radar, or it is in a little more casual of a way, because I've found in some communities, here people generally aren't shy, but some business owners don't know where to go, don't have the time or the desire to hunt someone down to complain or tell them about a problem. They just find a way to move past it. But it's something that may be simple for the town to fix, that they either don't know about or don't understand what the impact could have been. And that gives businesses a sounding board back, and it makes them feel as though the government is listening and looking to try and address and correct those issues.
Sorry, just in A, I think we should always include new and prospective businesses in all of the wording. At the end of A, it just says, and to work cooperatively with businesses and state agencies to retain and promote current businesses in Lunenburg. Is there a way?
The word current.
Right, or add current and prospective, or retain and, I just don't, I want to see new businesses come into town and help promote that as well, because that's economic development.
Retain, develop, and promote businesses in Lunenburg?
That would be good, yeah.
Yeah, just take out current,
Develop,
just take
yeah.
out. To
then I
retain,
think-
develop, and promote.
And then
okay.
I think in the goals, we don't really specify that as well, as far as new and potential businesses.
Yep.
And again, this is what was
No, you
developed
know, I
previously. It's
understand,
not, this isn't any sort of
But-
proposal. It's,
I mean, of course, I want the businesses we have to stay and to grow, but I also want to attract new businesses to come in and grow as well.
I think number 4 might be doing that, but you're right, it doesn't specify it.
And I think, we need to find some of the hurdles that businesses are encountering in town, and how we get around some of those, yeah. Well, even Unitil, it's been publicly stated several times that the cost of electricity in town is
Oh, that
a
was
hindrance
good.
for people.
so
Get a mirror.
I'm getting the sense that the board is in favor of creating such a committee.
Yes.
I don't think that you need to provide goals in the creation, but they need to have a mission, and you need to have a composition.
Yep.
So I'm not suggesting that you have to do it tonight. You could if you chose to. If you would like to put it off to the next meeting and come back and have a discussion of goals and do that all as one discussion, the mission, the membership, the creation, and the goals all as one, then, I don't know that at 10 o'clock at night,
That we can all be thinking really
we're
well.
going to get
yeah.
too far on developing goals. And I'm looking down the table, and I think the four of you are going to have similar goals in some instances and divergent goals in others. So I think having some time to think about that might breed some ability for you all to be more pointed in what you think a good goal or goals would be.
I don't know, I feel like the committee should establish their own goals.
I was
Fair
just
enough.
going to say that. I think that, and goals change year to year.
They
I
do.
mean, I think that it makes sense that the committee, once they're established, define their goals and set reasonable goals, attainable goals, and then the following year, those goals may be very different.
Mm-hmm.
So I would like to see the committee develop the goals.
As far as membership, I would like to see us start getting away from adding another hat to an existing volunteer, because I know that it tends to lend to burnout, and it also detracts from attracting new volunteers. For one, because they soon learn after gaining membership to a board that it's not just that membership, it's whatever else the board passes them or what they need to do. And two, it's for a long time before I got involved, I kept looking and saying, wow, it's the same 15 people on all these boards and committees, everything. The same 15 people.
But again, I think with like charter review, it doesn't have to be a physical member. I think we should it could be our designee if we find
Designee.
somebody, you know what I mean?
Charter review is much more important.
Well,
than
No, but what I'm saying is they took the approach that the planning board member wasn't, the planning
No, but
board
tho-
appoints
those-
a person, but it
those
doesn't have
first
to be a
three-
physical planning board member. It can be anybody.
The way those first three read would be members of those committees.
Well, that's what I mean.
So,
That's
so
why
you're
that
saying
gives
just
us
change
the
that word,
opportunity
one member
to-
appointed by.
One designee,
So that
one
means one of the
designee.
four of
One
us
member
is gonna have
appointed
to do
by.
it if it's a planning board member.
Yeah.
But if we have a designee.
Well, no, I don't think it should be, well, okay.
You know.
Okay, I see what, yeah, I
we
guess
do
it's the same
interviews
thing.
and- Or if have no interest, then one of us is gonna end up doing it anyways.
Well, but there's also member of the Board of Selectmen, member of the Planning Board, and I think that,
I for sure think there should be members at large.
yeah, and I think the idea behind those is that those are two groups that would have significant output from the Economic Development Committee coming their way and having firsthand knowledge of that working and how they work would be beneficial to that group.
I think that your point about requiring the Lunenburg business owner to also be a resident, I think we got to talk about that, because there are some business owners in town that may not be residents that I think it's important that they be represented.
And likewise, there are
Yeah.
some residents that are business owners in other towns.
Right, right.
Maybe there's a reason for that.
Yep, exactly, exactly.
Well, and one of the themes that came up in the charter review process was trying to make the appointed positions more available to people. So, especially in this situation where it's not, it's a committee that sits under us. It's not, they're not making
So
zoning
They're not
policy
making
and
final
all that
decisions,
stuff,
they're
yeah.
an advisory
They're an
group.
advisory board.
Yeah.
So just as an example, planning board, we've got 8 committee reports. So on top of each one of us coming here 2 Mondays a month for 2 to 5 hours, we've got 2 or potentially 3 other meetings just because of this one. And
Well, and the homework for all the meetings. Because it's not just going to the meetings, it's the work behind the meeting.
Right. No doubt. So just something,
So we're gonna continue this discussion?
I would like to continue it at
course.
10 o'clock.
Yeah,
I
I'm
can't
good.
keep my eyes
I'm
open,
good.
so.
okay, so we touched upon master plan and we didn't really touch upon master plan much, did we?
So do you want this to come back at the next meeting?
Well, what is,
Will the four of you be ready to dial some of those things in at the next meeting?
I hope so. I mean,
I guess I want to understand what it is, what's the ask? Are we looking to see if we want to set up a master planning committee?
No,
Or
no.
are we talking about the RFP to go out for master
I'm
planning?
sorry, I'm still in economic development.
Oh, okay, I'm sorry, because we switched to
Yeah,
master
well,
planning. Okay.
He meant, so do you want to talk about the composition at the next meeting? And
Of the
finalize
economic
the Economic
development.
Development Committee?
Yes.
Okay.
Is there a consensus amongst us that the committee should come up with the goals, not us?
I think you're right. Yep.
Okay, so no goals.
So really, all you need to finalize
Goal
is
list.
the composition.
Right,
Uh,
well, we
it-
haven't voted on the mission statement.
Well, no, but and forgive me if I'm misspeaking, but it sounds like everybody's on board with what we came up with this evening.
I am.
And
I don't
I'll
know.
write it up and send it
Yeah,
around, and
I
if we
mean-
need to tweak it more, we can during that discussion.
So what are we talking about with master plan?
Nothing. Let's just wait and find out about the grant.
Okay, because I think that makes the most sense.
Well, and I think the other part of that puzzle is being able to work cooperatively with primarily the Board of Selectmen on a lot of that stuff, because we have a plan that's been done, very little of it's been implemented. And we've got to cut through the red tape and the, circle around the same issue again and again and again. I mean, I don't see any of the information in the existing master plan that looks way off base to me. It's all very,
It's all relevant.
yeah. And we haven't done anything with it. And
Yep.
so, in my mind, the bigger issue is how do we build consensus and work on some of this stuff? Because I don't feel like the new master plan is going to be dramatically different than what we've got.
Exactly.
So,
I think the visioning is really what determines that, though, because
but ultimately, you need to be able to get something done, And that's my biggest concern, is being able to build some consensus.
correct, but maybe the issue with getting something done is there isn't a cogent vision that a majority of people have bought into. Whether it's a majority on the town-wide level or the I'm involved in town level, there's not a consensus on where we're going. And so doing the visioning in theory, and again, it's based on participation. So whoever gets the most people to show up controls the vision. But that seems to be where everything ceases, is what people's vision is and where are we trying to get to, because there isn't any consistency there.
I just feel like, it's our responsibility to work on the master plan, but we can plan everything we want and vision till we're blue in the face. If we don't have cooperation from primarily the Board of Selectmen and get something we can move forward, then we've spent a lot of time for nothing. Time and, more importantly, money.
I do think it's important that we have consensus, but I also think it's really important that we get out there into the community and hear from the community about what their vision is. And I don't know how we really do that.
Well, I
But
look at
that's
town
part of
meeting.
the master planning. But
And-
unfortunately, as you know, it is not an overwhelming response at town meeting either.
No, but when you, ultimately, what you're gonna get done gets done at town meeting.
No, I agree
And
with
so
that.
you can come forward with the argument, well, that's a small group of people, it doesn't represent all the residents, and that's very true, but that's our body, and they make the decision. And we've had a lot of situations where, we did the Vertex study on all kinds of buildings. And the plan that was put forward at the last town meeting was to vacate the two best buildings in favor for one of the least favorable buildings based on square footage or whatnot. And it was shot down, essentially. You look at Old Primary, that's the worst building. And we went to town meeting and proposed, let's demo the worst building we evaluated. And people said no. And they've said no 3 times. So
Well-
take that information and look at the building we're sitting in Ritter and say, what's the future of these buildings? If we're not going to demo the worst building in the center of town, do you think anybody's going to want to sell or demo this building or Ritter?
But
No.
I think to Paula's point, getting out into the community is important because, and I think that bears itself out in the RFP or RFQ process, and may drive a lot of how you pick what consultant you're going to work with. And if you get more people involved in the visioning, potentially you open up more people to buy into the plan. You get a consensus of where we're going, and you get more people to show up at town meeting
Exactly.
and vote to follow the items that get laid out in the plan. So it's a theoretically domino effect based on how you get people to come and do things. And I take your point that
And master plan, while I understand your comments regarding that particular issue, there's a lot of other issues. I mean, do we want to promote rehabilitation of parks? Do we want to create more parks? That's one of the things outstanding in the master plan. What do we see as the use of vacant, undesignated lands? I mean, I have a whole list of the things that have been in every plan. So it's more than just that issue, but I think where we really haven't gotten out there in the community, the Board of Selectmen or the Planning Board, in a visioning session to really try to get people to come. And I don't know how we do that. I don't know whether we have neighborhood meetings. I don't know whether we have, coffee hours, like the chief did a really great thing with Coffee with the Chief. Maybe we do something like that. Maybe a consultant does something like that.
I mean, I would argue that there's been a lot of outreach. I mean, we did the charrette, and there was a, walkability thing from this building and Old
But
Primary and so on.
I agree, but we've tried, but unfortunately, they're not incredibly well attended. So how do we improve that?
No. But it's and I understand there's more issues to address, clearly. But to me, when you vacate a building in '05 and it's 2019 and you haven't done anything with it, to me, that's where you focus your attention. And we can look at parks and all kinds of other stuff, but in my mind, we've got to, I mean, we're not done the capital planning work that we did back in '05 when we vacated Old Primary for the new building. I mean, to me, that's the new primary left undone.
Believe me, I share your frustration with the facilities. We have different outlooks on what we should do with those facilities, which is fine, but I share your frustration with the lack of movement on the issues. But master planning is specific elements that we're charged with, that we have to go through all of them. So I think I don't mind tackling both of them in parallel. And I've advocated for discussions with the Board of Selectmen, and I was frustrated that the Planning Board wasn't part of those discussion processes, and why we weren't, I have no idea. But I think that has to happen. I agree completely with you. But I just think that it's a parallel issue to master planning. I think we've got to talk about master planning.
It's parallel until you don't affect any outcome. We sat on this board most of us did, for months and worked on the marijuana thing.
Mm-hmm.
We get to town meeting and the prohibition thing just goes up in smoke. That to me, no pun intended, that to me was 6 out of 7 articles. Just disappeared, vaporized. And I'm not gonna sit here and advocate to spend $1 of the taxpayers' money to put all kinds of plans forward to get to town meeting and have the thing disappear. To me, it's ludicrous. I mean, we've done the TAPE, we've done the Vertex, and we beat this thing to death. For all the money that we spent on planning around buildings, we could have abated the asbestos in at least Old Primary, if not Old Primary and TCP. And regardless of what you think the future of either of those buildings is, step one is get rid of the asbestos. You can't
I
tear
don't
it
disagree.
down. You can't. renovate the thing without getting rid of the asbestos.
Tanner,
And
we're not,
so-
I don't disagree, and I agree with you about spending money. I mean, if you
I just-
remember the last couple meetings, I've said, I don't want to just go out for an RFP for $100,000 and have another plan that's going to sit on the shelf.
Yeah.
It has to include an implementation component. And there are many things, and you just said it yourself, that have been repeated over and over and over again. And we need to see movement on those. And so if we're going to spend money, the money should be to actually move on those, not to just write the same thing again.
And I talk to a lot of people that, you know, are involved in small business and pay a lot of taxes in town. And I think that's the underlying theme is, where's all my tax dollars going? We've got a $40 million budget. Where is it being spent? And I think we really need to focus on the things that we can actually affect some change on
Yeah.
and move things forward. I mean, like I said with the asbestos thing, whether you want to tear the building down, keep it as an open lot, rehab the building, that's step one. And I feel like as a taxpayer, I'm not in favor of supporting any of these pie-in-the-sky ideas because I don't see a lot of the day-to-day simple stuff getting done. So, enough said.
All right, so master plan, we're gonna wait to hear on the grant. Economic development, we put on September 9.
Nope, on August 26th.
23rd. Is it the 20th?
26th.
26th. Okay, it's August 26th, it's September 23rd. Gotcha.
Minutes approval, we've done. Committee reports, we've done. Director's items.
Just same stuff that's still on the docket. I mean, the solar bylaw we're going to talk about at the next meeting. Hopefully you all have comments and thoughts. If you get them ahead of time, to me, great. If not, we'll talk about them that night. And off-street parking, we've kind of tabled for a little while.
Okay.
Oh, and I do have some stuff for you guys to sign at the end. Mostly checks.
Blank ones?
So August 26th, we got economic development, Stone Farm hearing, solar bylaw discussion. September 9, we get earth removal. September 23, we get Unitil come back.
There's nothing else that's come in, Adam,
On the 23rd?
for anything?
No, not at this time.
So September 9 seems a little late.
Earth removal.
Okay, yep.
So that could get heavy.
Well, it could.
For 500
We're definitely getting punchy.
How many yards?
Divide by 1.3.
Ongoing items, they'll continue to be ongoing, probably. Public comment. Good, I got a question for you, too.
Also disappointed nobody working going out on a limb earlier. I wasn't gonna do it. Phoebe Adams, where am I from? I don't know, Williamstrack.
You're a lake
Forever.
person.
Just a couple comments on economic development. The BOS, we disbanded having an economic development group. And one of the reasons that I spoke out against having it was I think that everybody who already exists in a role can work on it without burdening all of us with another group and another task. And I think we talk so much about what to do and don't do. So I started taking notes about 20 minutes ago. One thing that was said was we need to work on controlling the vision. Rather than controlling a vision, I'm thinking live the vision. My example would be farmer's market, last year to this year. It's made the center of town vibrant, exciting, it's busy, and that's the vision, is just do something. So have a better farmer's market. In terms of Old Primary, the selectmen, we have 3 goals this year. And the first goal we could all agree on, all 5 of us, was to specifically just come up with a solution for that lot. Because it's ridiculous that we just refuse to fix one single thing because we're trying to reinvent the entire town. And so one of our goals is to specifically work on that building and figure out what it is. When we talk about economic development and master planning, I'm concerned to even hear the word RFP come up, because that goes back into selling. And in the since 2016, an article has gone to town meeting 3 times to convey or sell or RFP these parcels of land, and they've said no every time. And every time it's been brought to town meeting, interestingly, it's been brought with a different reason. First, it was for economic development. Then it was for some type of historic preservation. There's always a different reason we're trying to sell the same parcels within the last 3 years, and then the result is still the same. So I think no matter what reason we try to tell the town, let's sell a parcel, the town doesn't want to sell these parcels. So if we're talking about economic development and we're talking about master planning, can we please stop saying RFP as part of it? Because I don't want to think that
I just want to be clear.
yeah,
Our
RFP
request
isn't-
for proposal, and that's how we would hire the consultant.
Right, it's
who's
a-
doing the master plan.
Okay, I
So-
was just concerned, we were going down a path of talking, can I finish
yeah,
my public
yeah.
comment? And I'll be really quick. But we were going down the path, when this came up, we were talking about getting input, envisioning input. And that's when it started to come up again. And so I guess the reason I came up to comment was because I've been to all the visioning input, like a few years of it. And we've had really successful meetings with really big turnout, and we haven't spoken a word that's come out of those meetings. One of the biggest meetings I went to was the charrette in December 2017. And a lot of people were there, and a lot of people who I hadn't seen at a meeting before were there, and we've never talked about what came out of that meeting. I went to a gigantic meeting at the Eagle House. It was held in the day to benefit the seniors. That was in early 2018. Lots of input, great discussion, passionate discussion. We've never mentioned a word that's come out of that meeting. Believe me, we've gotten input, and then we just bury it, and then we keep seeking input, and I don't know why we don't use the input we have. So-
Just to be clear, when I send RFP, when on our agenda, it says master planning RFP. When we hire a consultant to assist with the master plan, it's a request for proposal process, which is required by Mass General Law. That's what I was talking about. It had nothing to do with selling of buildings. It was, when I asked what was on the agenda, is it master planning talking about a committee, or is it talking about the
Okay, then I apologize
RFP?
on that mix-up, because when it came up, it's when we started talking about the
Yeah,
buildings.
no, I was
and the
asking,
plan.
what is it we're talking about? Are we talking about a master planning committee or a master plan RFP?
Because that-
Which is to hire someone, and I'm against hiring someone if we're just gonna say the same thing we've said over and over.
When the Montechusett Regional Planning Commission helped us put together that information in 2013
Economic
for
development,
economic
believe me, you've heard
development,
me.
a lot of that had to do with selling the parcels. So there's a lot of overlap there, and I just want to make sure that we can go forward with ideas without constantly going back to that same rut, because it's getting us nowhere.
Yeah, no, I don't disagree. I don't want to go back and just repeat everything we've done. That's what I've said over and over again. But the RFP process is something, if we move forward with an updated master plan, we will have to do an RFP.
And RFP is just codified within 30B on any purchase or sale, any,
I was
yeah.
coming up in that context of conveyance, and I apologize.
So my question for you, Ms. Adams, is I thought I remembered seeing something about discussion about discontinuing, maybe it was something I heard about discontinuing committee reports on the Board of Selectmen? Has that been a discussion item?
Not that I'm aware of. We formally no longer liaise, but
But I guess that was the other part of that
I
question.
think it's kind of connected to that topic.
Okay.
Feel free to bring any information you hear here to the Board of Selectmen if you want.
That's why earth removal
No,
permitting stuff, I asked
no,
them
I
to do it together tonight, because we're.
Appreciate it.
So we're on the board comment and concern, and I will start off that I was remiss in not mentioning that we need to post Rhonda's vacancy and advertise. Okay? You probably already had that
Yeah.
written down.
What is the appointment process for that?
To join appointment between the select board.
Yeah, so we notify the Board of Selectmen in writing, which is really just a memo or an email to the town manager, which she got yesterday from Rhonda. And then they'll advertise, and I think the advertisement's usually 30 days. And then there isn't a defined process other than it's a joint appointment between the two boards. And
Okay.
it's been done in several different ways. At one point, this board interviewed potential applicants, and the Board of Selectmen interviewed them, and then there was a joint meeting.
Okay.
At other times, it's been just a joint meeting, and the applicant or applicants stands in front of the two boards and says, this is why I want to do it, and they make a decision.
All right. I think we need to, because I went through the process at one point, and I think we need to increase communication between the two boards. I think it should be somewhat consistent for the benefit of whoever wants to do it, also for the benefit of the boards, that it should be, we should share information. Like the last time, we had asked questions and got an answer to questions that we didn't provide to the Board of Selectmen that I think would have been helpful to them. I just think we should share all the information we have. And it just should be a consistent, we should get a consensus of how we want to approach it as a group, since it's all of us. Because we did our thing, they did their thing, and then we had the joint meeting.
No, we
and
never
it just-
shared anything?
It just was, yeah, I would have liked to seen the questions they were going to ask beforehand. I mean, and I would be happy to provide the questions I was going to ask beforehand. I just think we need,
Well, and two comments. One is when we went through charter review, this very issue came up because as the board that is missing a member, we're outvoted.
right,
So when we go into a joint appointment, the selectmen have the majority over us. And
Right.
Unless they're short a member. And there's really no way around that. So hypothetically, if we had two applicants, this board could recommend one and the Board of Selectmen could vote in another, and that's happened. I don't like that. I feel like the board that is in search of a member should have the ability to have more influence in this situation, but that's just the way it goes. And I think we should have the opportunity to make the recommendation to the Board of Selectmen, so it should be more like we
that's
pick.
exactly,
But
It's
it's not
not,
gonna make any difference. in
that's
the
not the
vote.
way it works, but unfortunately.
can't hurt.
Yeah.
Can't hurt to make a
Honestly, it sounds like
recommendation on those
it's
things.
something that this board and the Board of Selectmen need to sit down and discuss. Because you can have all the thoughts you want and they can completely disagree, and until you have that discussion, you can't find common ground. So
Yeah.
I'll speak to the town manager and see if she and the chair of the Board of Selectmen can are willing to and when they would be able to have a joint meeting.
Yep.
Right, and it's another thing, and again, we need to keep an eye on special permits and things that come in, but if we're not under the gun, under a timeline for something like that, I don't.
No, I mean, you have 65 days to open a hearing.
Right,
And you can approve a special permit with just 4 of you.
right,
Yeah.
but it needs.
It
to-
just puts the applicant. in a
It puts the
Exactly.
applicant in a
Situation, but
spot.
I
that's
don't want
not
to hold things
necessarily-
up, but I don't want to rush it either, is basically what I'm saying. Were you
And-
done with me? Sorry. go ahead,
And
Tanner.
this issue is more of a global thing than
Yes.
just with
Right.
our board, so.
Well, but
I
if
think
you
it's-
establish something now with the Board of Selectmen, it creates a model for other boards, or for the Board of Selectmen to create a model or policy that they can then mirror with other elected bodies that they do this with.
I mean, I think it was Paula's appointment. We were just invited, we didn't
Yeah.
even have microphones. We were just
Yep.
sitting in the audience and it was like boom, boom, boom.
Yeah, it was my appointment.
So, yeah. So,
Also, it seems to have slipped off the radar again, year after year, the chairs meeting. Either the chair or an appointee of the chair or the chair and the vice chair. I mean, the bigger the better, but to get multiple boards and groups together in a group that has discussions about all the things that are affecting the town in general, but specifically at each different meeting spot, but just people that are in the know, to have conversations with other people in the know. It's not unusual for there to be very serious things going on in conservation that planning doesn't know about, or stuff in any one of those smaller groups that doesn't necessarily have a committee report or a liaison, or a liaison.
So
Jeez.
we're talking planning board, ZBA, Concom, sewer.
Everything that's listed on the town website, anybody, I don't really care. The bigger the better.
I had advocated this for the past 3.
I know.
4 years.
I know you have.
We sent a request and got a very tepid response.
No, so what happened was is yourself and Heather sent out a request. You got one, Mr. Gravel was, I remember specifically, was the only one that responded. So then I myself, as chair, went to every other committee, got Conscom on board, got Board of Selectmen on board.
I thought it was
got
everybody but Board of Health.
everybody but Board of Health on board. I informed yourself and Heather of that, and then we never planned a meeting. I mean, I had the membership, everybody was willing to do it, everybody was like, sure, let me know when, and it just never materialized.
Years ago, when I was chair of the Board of Selectmen, it was one of the things that I absolutely set about doing. I did. They were incredibly productive meetings. We had, and that is how the sign-off for building permits came about. This was years ago, because when we had the meeting, the Board of Health was upset that a building permit had been issued, conservation was, we had this whole discussion about how did this occur, and that is exactly how the building permit sign-off procedure was implemented in the town of Lunenburg.
I mean,
This was many years ago, and a lot of other things came out. What are you working on?
Right.
I'm working on this. Well, that impacts me, and this is, and it was something I advocated after I wasn't the chairman on the Board of Selectmen. It was something I continued to advocate for. Unfortunately, the board at the time didn't think it was a good idea. Personally, I think the more you communicate, the more open communication you have amongst committees and boards, the better off you are.
Definitely.
So I completely agree with you.
And technically, it doesn't have to be town-sponsored. It's not a quorum of any group. So if you had everybody in, you didn't need them to organize it, you could have just gotten together. Could have been someplace that you can,
They initiated the discussion, I was hoping there would be some.
but I'm just saying,
Well,
I'm just saying, we don't have to do it with,
You get paid to do that.
No, but I think
I understand, but.
in the interest of transparency, it would make sense
To have it be in a public.
Oh, of course,
Yeah.
yeah. I mean, it doesn't,
Well, I thought the whole point was to bring it back to the group. So, I mean, if you've got, it doesn't matter if it's private meeting, or if it's public meeting, if the people get together and have the discussion and bring it back to their individual boards, it's like a whole bunch of mice family going to one ball of cheese. It doesn't matter where the ball of cheese
I
is.
just think
Working
it-
on, how do you think it
From a
affects
public
us?
perspective,
Here's-
standpoint,
It's an easy
perspective.
conversation. What are you working on? How do you
Right.
feel it affects us?
Right.
Here's
It's
what
like-
we're
it's
working on.
basically like
Here's
a
how I
depart-
feel it
It's
affects
basically like a
you.
department head meeting,
We've
but
got,
it's more of a communication.
we've got picnic tables and 10 by 10s at the farmer's market on Sundays after
Great idea.
1 o'clock, so,
Yeah.
So I do have one more board comment. Are we without a zoning commissioner at the moment?
yeah.
Yes.
For a short period of time.
Were we formally informed of that?
Were you formally informed? You were informed Mr. Rhodes retired.
When was that?
That was the 1st of August.
Okay, I didn't realize we were informed. And what is our plan? So what if we need a zoning opinion?
We are, well, I mean, we can work with people on zoning. We're in the process of exploring hiring someone and regionalizing, and it's something we've been working on for multiple years. Part of the issue is our pay scale and our location
I'm
doesn't,
familiar, we've been trying for years. and
yes,
I understand that.
doesn't hold up.
And again, there's a difference between a building inspector and a zoning commissioner. We can,
Well, the-
outside help for a building inspector is one thing, because they're all qualified to, inspect and.
But a
as far as the
zoning,
zoning, I'd prefer somebody, I mean, we're not gonna get it now, but how are they familiar with the Lunenburg zoning bylaw enough? to-
how is anybody familiar? I
Well,
mean, it's a matter
Rhodes have
of,
been doing it for some time, he at least been filling in.
but it's a matter of reading it.
Right.
And by Mass General Law, the building commissioner is the zoning officer unless the community has a specific bylaw designating a separate zoning officer.
But we're not bound by his opinion, it's just.
We're not bound by anybody's opinion. So if there are plenty of instances where someone had come in with some manner of previous zoning opinion that Mr. Rhodes disagreed with, and they said, but I have it in writing, and the issue was, well, you don't have a building permit, so that it isn't worth the paper it's written on, because until you have the building permit, it's up to the person who signs the permit whether or not the zoning is interpreted in that way.
We've got 2 minutes to either continue the meeting, vote to continue the meeting, or close it.
I'm good.
All right. Less any further board comment or concerns, I would take a motion.
Motion to adjourn.
Second.
Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. Thank you very much.
Okay, I need you guys to sign. We got the corrected Mylars.
Are they,
Oh, how
are
did
they
that
corrected
go?
correctly?
What was their response to that?
I called them and said, you gave us the wrong Mylars. Oh, okay, we'll bring the other ones down. I mean, it wasn't a thing, and I have covenants for all 9 subdivisions.
It wasn't a thing, and he already had them prepared?
No, he had to have Whitman and Bingham.
What do you mean you have covenant?
So, in order to secure each subdivision, the applicant and the board sign a covenant.
He already had them prepared? No, I mean,
No, Whitman and Bingham had them prepared. The covenants,
in May?
I don't know, they told us they had to print them out.
Somebody, are we off?
So the covenants,
Bullshit.
the covenants are, essentially, it's a legal document that says he can't pull a building permit until the board releases the lot.